Welcome. My name is Terry Drew Karanen. This is the final talk in my four-part series on the basics of the science of mind as developed and taught by Reverend Dr. Ernest Holmes. So far, we've covered the thing itself, the new thought concept of God as universal power, the way it works. The key here is that it works through us, not for us. What it does. Because it works through us, it takes us at our word. It doesn't judge, and it's unchangeable. And finally, how to use it. One of the difficulties I've found over the years in the New Thought movement is that there's an emphasis on theory and our history, and too much application, or too little application rather, on practice. In science in general, theory must give way to application. It's fine to say treatment works. Fascinating to hear about manifestation. But without doing the treatment ourselves, nothing will change for us. Perhaps part of the issue is that all the universal principles we've been talking about are intangible. These immutable laws only become tangible when we demonstrate the supremacy of superior and spiritual thought force over apparent material resistance. For example, we often hear historians or newscasters when speaking about the Great Depression in the 1920s or 30s, or any other recession we've had since, that those periods of time hit everyone hard. They didn't. Society says you should act your age. We don't have to. Every depression, recession, or lull in growth has produced some of the most successful careers. And as for acting your age, try Googling Iris Apfel, that's A-P-F-E-L, if you're not familiar with her. At 102, she's still wowing us. With immutable law must come unshakable faith and compassion for ourselves and others. In God mind, there are no sick people. It's a wonderful affirmation and true on the absolute level of thinking. But merely proclaiming it isn't going to heal anyone. Likewise, it's easy to proclaim, there are no needy people. Anyone can say this, with or without training in scientific spiritual thinking. But if we are going to prove universal principle in our lives, we're going to have to do something more than announce a principle like some town crier in colonial America, no matter how true it might be. How do we do that? First, there are a couple of things that, for these laws to work in our lives, we must remember. Law is immutable, unchangeable. God doesn't do things to us. God does things through us. Law must flow through us in order to manifest for us. It's not about what we think, but we must relearn how to think correctly. Again, it doesn't matter what we think, but how we think. It doesn't matter what you are trying to do, to get a new job, to find a life partner, or live with a life-threatening health diagnosis. It doesn't matter if you are a Republican, Democrat, liberal, or conservative, gay, straight, bi, trans, queer, or questioning, old or young, married or single, living in the lap of luxury, or just getting by in poverty. It doesn't matter. Why? Because the laws are no respecter of persons and responds to us each in the same way. And what way is that? It responds in accordance to our understanding of it and to the degree in which we are aware of our understanding. Since the universal laws respond to our thought, and since those laws respond to both consciously directed thought as well as unconscious, subjective thought, and since those thoughts, both conscious and unconscious, have been brought about by societal rules and years of being told God doles out punishment and lessons, then it behooves us to learn how to guard our thoughts. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23, Wise King Solomon encouraged us to guard our heart. Why? Because our heart is the seat of emotions, and making decisions consciously or objectively, and subconsciously or subjectively, based on how we feel emotionally, not just the thought process. For the past few decades, science has shown repeatedly that there is a connection between the organ we call our brain and another organ in our chest, the heart. They communicate. There are even some studies that indicate the heart acts as a mini brain. There is a world of difference between knowing you are doing the right thing because it feels good in your heart and making a decision based on transient emotional passion. If you have a Bible, you might want to check out the advice of King Solomon, specifically in the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 20, and going all the way through the first part of chapter 5, specifically verse 2a. Here you'll find admonition on how to safeguard your heart, avoiding the crookedness of speech and removing the deviousness of your lips, to look straight ahead and keep your eye on the prize. I'm not about to preach to you today, though this part of the series does include quite a few biblical references, but I do quite a bit of preaching when it comes to creating and following a vision and mission in your life. If you haven't already done so, figure it out. Figure out what you want out of life, as well as what you want to put into it. Then do whatever it takes to reach your goals. Will there be collateral damage on the way? Yes. But what kind? You might just have to give up your stories on how you can't have what you want. You'll be offered the opportunity to give up poverty, sadness, depression, sickness, anger, and fear. I can do without those things in my life. How about you? The reward? You'll be presented with a chance to take up prosperity, happiness, joy, health, peace, and security. Which feels better? So, how do we do that? We begin to consciously and firmly learn to practice how we think. We smooth out the course for our feet, not your brother's or your sister's feet, your feet. Do not incline to the right hand or the left hand, which not only made sense in Solomon's day, but it is certainly applicable to those in our far right and far left world. For the past few decades, we hear very little about community and living together in peace. What Solomon was telling us is not to favor one side over the other, but be inclined to hear both sides. It's not a popular stance, but it does cause us to think, and that's a good thing. Finally, he tells us, guard your thinking abilities. Wow. I'm sure that in the middle of the various elections throughout the world, that Solomon would agree that in our world of fake news and AI-generated false videos and robocalls, this is still applicable. How does the law work? It works for us by flowing through us. But what if you still don't quite believe that? Here's what Ernest Holmes wrote about that. Let me say that you're going to want to replay this section a couple of times. It may seem a little like this metaphysical psychobabble that I've mentioned, but it's not. It's probably one of the strongest indicators of why the laws seem to not work at some point, or why they work for some and not others, which we've already established isn't possible. Ready? Okay. Hence, he says, you got to love the words that show up in the historical New Thought writings. Hence, I can't say that I've ever texted that to anyone, but I digress. Again, hence, it follows that if we believe that it will not work, it really works by appearing to not work. When we believe that it cannot and will not, then according to principle, it does not. But when it does not, it still does. only it does according to our belief that it will not. This is our own punishment through the law of cause and effect. We do not enter in because of our doubts and fears. It is not a punishment imposed upon us by the Spirit of God, but an automatic result of failing constructively to use the law of God. Really insightful. Go back, listen to it again. God doesn't punish us if we can't figure out something. If something wasn't working out for me when I was growing up, my grandma Esther used to say, Terry, you just wasn't holding your mouth right. And King Solomon and Holmes would agree with grandma. We need to hold our mouths right to see the life we want to create. We must be consciously aware of what is coming out from our mouths if we expect the law to work for us. Our spoken words reflect what is going on in our consciousness and subconscious thoughts. Ever make what's called commonly a Freudian slip? Well, maybe you didn't. We often mean exactly what we say when we're using our out loud voice, even though we might be inappropriate, politically correct, or embarrassing to others and ourselves. This also speaks to the difference between positive thinking and thinking positively. There's a difference. Think those are the same? They're not. And this is why the science of mind is all about one and not so much about the other. Positive thinking is automatic, as if we are an automaton. It's good, but it's passive and receptive. But when we are thinking positively, it's a conscious, concerted effort to align our thoughts with our goals to affect a positive outcome. The results, they're active and dynamic. Jesus of Nazareth is quoted in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, that you must accordingly be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. How do we attain that kind of perfection? The realization that we have this ability must be gained by the application of our knowledge. We do that by becoming more and more consciously aware of how we are directing the law. When Jesus said in Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away, our brother Jesus was striving to teach us the immutability of the law of righteousness. A practitioner of these teachings uses thought definitely and for specific purposes. The more definitely we use the law, the more directly it will respond to our word. If we understood the law as well as Jesus did, then we'd be removing false conditions as easily as he did. When I think of the stories told about the man Jesus, it seems he was a master practitioner of these laws. He knew without any doubt whatsoever. But our faith can be weak. Just like when we go to the gym or have some other type of exercise to strengthen our muscles, we must work to fortify our faith, and together we can do it. Would you like to know how this works? When I was reviewing the material, I found an old illustration that I'd completely forgotten about. It's one I used to tell while honoring my Finnish heritage and still explaining the principles. It's about an impoverished Finlander named Tavi. Tavi wishes to change his condition. He's a good student of science of mind, so he knows his situation is not in accord with divine reality. He believes spirit imposes no limitation, no real law to support lack, simply an expression of consciousness. He desires a definite result from his work. He remembers the law of life is the law of liberty or freedom, but the law of liberty moves through all affairs. If the image of limitation persists, it is a contradiction to statements about freedom. He needs to stop that. So he declares that limitations are neither person, place, nor thing. There is no power, no presence, and no law to support them. He affirms he does not believe in them, and therefore they have no place in his life. Tavi declares he's free from their influence forever. He begins to fill his thoughts with the idea of faith, the expectancy of good, and the realization of plenty. He senses the desires He sees mentally his good, and he engages in right action, putting his whole faith in the law of good. He denies anything and everything that contradicts his realization of truth. He gives thanks and he releases the word into universal law. Now, if you're not already enrolled in my spiritual mind treatment class that I'm currently giving, what I just walked you through is how we pray affirmatively in the New Thought movement. Scientific affirmative prayer is the single most important contribution made by the Science of Mind teaching. It gives us the structure to put into motion all the laws we study in religious science, unity, and all the other religions in the New Thought movement. So, back to Tavi. He decides to leave his home and go for a walk into the village, feeling much better. But then he runs into old Mr. Nieminen. If the Finns had a character in the Kalevala mythology like Eeyore of Winnie the Pooh, old Santeri Nieminen would be that character. Old Santeri starts in on his tale of woe, all the bad times we're having, how bad it is, how the 1% is the problem, etc., etc., etc. If Tavi listens to this tale of the serpent, as Holmes calls it, all the affirmative prayer work he just did will, well, pretty much be in the toilet. If Tavi starts buying into Santeri's thinking, he might just as well just flush and be done. That doesn't mean we can't have a conversation with people who spend their day researching conspiracy theories or who just have an ain't it awful attitude. But in his own mind, Tavi, and we too, must neutralize that type of thinking in our own mind. The term Dr. Raymond Charles Barker used was, "There is no truth in that," which he would quietly mutter to himself while hearing such nonsense. Does that sound like we're refusing to look at sickness, poverty, and unhappiness? No, not true at all. We do recognize what needs to be changed. That's not what we're discussing. We do not refuse to help those in need. Conversely, though, we don't get into bed with them by agreeing with their negativity. This is what Jesus meant when he said in Matthew chapter 15, verse 14, "If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the pit." Santere doesn't have to believe his life can get any better, but Tavi would be doing him no favors to turn away from the truth and believe the falsehoods old Mr. Nieminen is spewing all over the village. St. Paul, in his writing specifically to the Jewish Christians, speaks of the type of faith we must demonstrate to see our desires made manifest. In the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, he wrote, "Faith is the assured expectations of things hoped for, the evident demonstration of realities, though not beheld." The healing begins in our own mind. There is no process of healing, but there generally is a process in healing. Let me repeat that. There is no process of healing, but there is generally a process in healing. To give up fretting and worrying about our problems, we must take the time to change our thinking. We do this through meditation. We mentally treat our condition, no matter what the apparent contradictions may be. We work silently and quietly, as Jesus taught us to go into your private room and after shutting the door, pray in secret. Not like the haughty Pharisees and Sadducees did, by loudly praying in the street, gnashing their teeth, rending their clothes as a public demonstration of how righteous and holy they were. Nobody needs to know about your happiness and your business. Then, when you start looking lighter, younger, happier, when your relationships become more harmonious, when you walk into a room and people say, "What's she got that I don't?" That's when you just smile and know the truth. We work on changing our thinking, not with anxiety, but with anticipation, not with coercion, but with conviction, and not through compulsion, but in a state of conscious recognition and receptivity. We are not using our willpower to make things happen. We are not forcing God to perform like some trained poodle. Rather, we are accepting the good which is ours. We do not have to tell God how to do it. We are dealing with universal, omniscient, omnipresent intelligence, or as Reverend Helen used to tell us, for heaven's sakes, you're not dealing with big dummy in the sky. Spirit already knows. Spirit knows how you can have the life you want. It's going to look different for each of us because we're all individuals. Let the universal laws show off in your life by continually removing any mental obstacle you can, so that Spirit has a clean slate upon which to draw the manifestations of your desire. Holmes once wrote that a new science, a new religion, a new philosophy are rapidly being developed. The year was 1938. We've had almost 90 years of practice with this teaching. Together, we can start producing in a big way for ourselves, our families, our communities, our nations, and our planet. But it's up to us, you and me. Religious science, unity, divine science, and so many other faiths have led the way in presenting, teaching, and demonstrating how to have an amazing relationship with God and to have a life worth living. I encourage you to use the links in the comments below to learn more about those teachings. I hope you've enjoyed these 4 introductions to the science of mind as taught by Reverend Dr. Ernest Holmes. There are countless ways you could have spent the last few minutes of your day besides listening to me. You decided to listen to this video. I hope you found it encouraging in whatever is going on in your life right now. I'm honored that you chose to spend it with me. Thank you. And until another time, all the best to you, always.